Alrighty, so today we're going to talk about the Houston Dynamo in the Moving Forward series episode. And as always, anytime when I put an orange text on the board, that means it's really hard to read on the video. So I do apologize because of that. And as I've already explained in the Seattle Sounders Moving Forward series episode, I usually like to put the color text that match the same team that color that I'm talking about in the Moving Forward series episode. And while I could have easily gone with black for the Dynamo, I think it will be appropriate for them to have an orange text. But that being said, in terms of the Houston Dynamo, I mean, if you want to talk about who is the most improved team last season, it's got to be the Houston Dynamo. I mean, this is a team that for the past couple of years they've been adrift abyss and a team that has been a laughing stock in the Western Conference and a team that looked like they just had no direction whatsoever, despite the fact that, it feels like they were going to go for a rebuild, but then they decided to retool it and it just didn't quite work out. And then it just hit this year. It just hit with all the pieces working well, and that, not to mention, probably one of the biggest surprise of this season is that Ben Olsen in the year 2023 would be a guy that could lead a team of winning the US Open Cup and also lead a team all the way to the Western Conference Final. I mean, I know I can't believe that is the case, even though I've said it many times throughout this season. And a guy that, if it wasn't for Pat Nolan guiding that team to win the Supporter Shield and winning the Coach of the Year, you got to say that Ben Olsen deserved to have a nomination or at least be consideration of winning the Coach of the Year award this season. But in terms of this season for the Dynamo, they finished with a 14-9-11 record and they finished with 51 points. They scored 51 goals this season while allowing 38 goals, and they had a goal differential of plus 13. They finished fourth in the Western Conference, but most importantly, for the first time since 2017, they won some silverware. They won the US Open Cup in 2023. They spoiled the fairy tale ending of Inter Miami, once again winning another trophy in the year 2023 by beating them on the road. And albeit, yes, in that US Open Cup final, there wasn't Messi and his friends in that game. I mean, the script writers are basically saying that, yeah, we're pretty much making sure that Inter Miami will win this competition, especially playing at home. But the Houston Dynamo just say, nah, forget about the script writing, and also forget about the narrative of we can't win on the road. They won it on the road and kind of just prove people that in 2017, where, I know some people put 2017 of the U.S. Open Cup for the Dynamo as an asterisk because, all their games were played at home, and we know how good of a home team that is the Dynamo for the past couple of years. But, in terms of this U.S. Open Cup 2023 run, that you can't not really put an asterisk. And in fact, this is even more impressive than what we saw in 2017, considering they had to play on the road in a couple of these U.S. Open Cup games, and yet they still able to prevail, and most importantly prevail in the final or the final boss battle against a team that everybody thought that they were destined to win it. But unfortunately, they did get eliminated by LAFC in the Western Conference Final, and that's kind of usually the case where when we see some Cinderella story in MLS and some of these dark horse kind of team, like what I said about the Houston Dynamo, it's always going to eventually come to an end in the playoffs, and usually it's the conference final that comes to an end. I mean, I remember RSL made an incredible run in the playoffs, but their run kind of ended in a bit of a anticlimactic way in the Western Conference Final. And unfortunately for the Dynamo, it's the same thing. They lost to LAFC in a game where LAFC was just by far the better team, and that, the quality of the team kind of shown against a team that, I'm not saying the Dynamo doesn't have quality, but they definitely made it farther than anybody thought that they would be up to this point. Now, in terms of the head coach, Ben Olsen, he's been there since 2023 and arguably could have won the coach of the year if it wasn't for Pat Nolan, of course, winning the supporter shield with the FC Cincinnati. And also, usually, whoever wins the supporter shield, the head coach of that team will probably win the coach of the year, as what we've seen in the past. The chief soccer officer is Pat Onstad. He's been there since 2022, and I gotta say, Pat Onstad has done an incredible job with the Houston Dynamo, and that, we knew that he was gonna do a good job considering he'd done some really good thing with the Columbus Crew, but this was even gonna be a more daunting task considering, Houston has always been a team that is being very cheap in terms of their signing, and unlike where in Columbus, he might get a bigger budget to work with. He was working on a shoestring budget and still somehow able to get a core of a player or cores of players that can guide this team back to being relevant and winning a trophy in this year. Now, in terms of the top goal scorer, it's Aman Bassi with 10 goals. And one thing about the Houston Dynamo is that they don't really have a guy on the attack that are kind of the difference maker. We've seen this happen with some good teams where they always have a difference maker, but we also have seen some good teams that it's not about having difference maker. It's about the team is the star, and it feels like Houston is basically trying to steal that moniker from RSL this year, where the team is the star. Everybody can contribute to a way that they can get this team to not do well in the regular season, but also make a playoff push. And I've also said that those are usually the teams that are as hard to beat as teams that are favorites of winning MLS Cup. Because while I know a lot of people have said that that teams that are favored to win MLS Cup usually have difference makers and so forth. If you have a team that has well, they don't have like a difference maker on the attack, but have different guys that can step up and contribute, those are even more difficult team, or those are easily as difficult or even more difficult team to prepare, because you don't know exactly who is going to be the guy you need to shut down, because any of those guys that you have to trying to contain could be the spark of the team on any given game. But follow that, we got Corey Bear with 8 goals, followed by Hector Herrera with 4 goals, Nelson Quinones with 4 goals, and then Coco Garcia rounds up the top five with 3 goals. Top assist leader, you got Hector Herrera with 17 assists. I believe he led the league this season in terms of assists, followed by Coco Carrasquillo with 8 assists, Corey Bear with 6 assists, I mean Bossy with 4 assists, and Ivan Franco with 3 assists. When you look at the last 5 seasons, again, this year is just a year that not only is a surprising year of how well they've done this season, but consider what they've gone through in the past 4 seasons. I mean, it just kind of feel like this year looked like an outlier when you look at the last 5 seasons with a 14-9-11 record and finished with 51 points. Prior to that, they finished with 10-6-18 record with 36 points, and then in 2021, they finished dead last in the West, 6-12-30 with 30 points. In 2020, in the COVID shortened season, same thing. They finished dead last, 4-9-10, and finished with 21 points. One kind of interesting thing I want to note is that just like FC Cincinnati, the Houston Dynamo was a team that finished dead last in the COVID shortened season in their respective conference. Look how things have turned around for both of these teams that wear orange in a quick span of period, and it also kind of just shows you how in this league. While I love the league that has parity, and also it doesn't take much to try to change your fortune. If you can build yourself a decent roster, you don't even need to worry about are they ready to compete. If they are performing at the rate that you are, or even performing above average at the rate that they are, then you can definitely easily get yourself to be a contender team and a surprising contender team, and even make a dark horse run like what we see the Houston Dynamo did this season. But before that, in 2019, they finished with a 12-4-18 record and finished with 40 points. And again, those 4 seasons that I mentioned prior to this year, they all miss out on the playoffs. Now, in terms of average attendance, yeah, unfortunately, this is kind of the thing where Dynamo fans would don't want to hear, but I have to mention it mainly because yeah, their attendance is still a big problem. 15,000 27, which is good for 29th in the league, which means that's dead last in the league. I mean, again, attendance has always been an issue, and it's always been a mystery of why the Houston Dynamo doesn't get good attendance. I mean, yes, you could argue the weather, it could be a problem because in the summer it gets incredibly hot in Houston, but then Austin fans are going to point out that hey, we're still selling out game after game, even though we play in a similar climate as what the Dynamo has. And then I think even a bigger example is that their hated rival FC Dallas is averaging pretty good attendance too, and that stadium is not fully covered as well. So again, it is still a big mystery of why they struggle in terms of attendance. I mean, some have said that maybe it's due to the fact that they've been so bad for so long. Maybe it's kind of turning fans away, and that could be understandable because when you're not really a competitive team for so long, it's hard to try to get some of their hardcore fans back into the stands. But that being said, the argument to that is that you saw other team around the league, especially FC Cincinnati, of how bad they were, and they at times they had problem in terms of getting people in the stands. Well, actually, I wouldn't say they had hard time, but you definitely saw a lot of empty seats at Nippar Stadium, and even when TKO Stadium was open, you still saw a lot of empty seats in the first season, and yet they immediately turned around and people started showing up again. So again, it's still a big mystery of why the Dynamo have had problem with the attendance, and especially getting it, another thing that people have said that it's because they lack that superstar kind of player. They got Hector Herrera. I mean, Hector Herrera is a huge name in Mexican soccer, and that I thought that was going to be a signing that could get butts in the seats. And while it definitely did for a time, it's definitely not as much as I thought it would be when he decided to sign with this Dynamo team just a year and a half ago. Speaking of Hector Herrera, he's the MVP of this team. I mean, he's probably one of the best number 10 in this team, or actually not even a number 10. He's not really a number 10. He's more like a deep line playmaker. So I mentioned many times with these deep line playmaker, you could argue he, along with Edouard Leuven, probably the best deep line playmaker in this league, and getting 17 assists. Though I will say that in terms of the MVP, as much as it was pretty obvious for me to pick Hector Herrera, there's definitely some honorable mention. Coco Carrasquilla, a breakout season that has got a lot of team in Europe trying to get him from the Houston Dynamo, and then Bossy. Even though I know his goal tally's inflated because of the amount of penalty that he scored, he definitely contributes on the attack too. And even Corey Bear, having probably his best regular season since his rookie season with RSL. That was also contributing, and that's also why it's kind of hurt to see that he eventually move on from this Houston Dynamo team, and that there's a lot of question of how they would replace him. Now, in terms of disappointment, I could have easily gone with one of the two DPs that they had. I mean, in terms of how good this season has been for the Dynamo, besides Hector Herrera, they still are taking a huge swing and a miss in terms of DP. And while I could easily with Seba Ferreira. Seba Ferreira was loaned out eventually, so he didn't really play the whole season. I don't think that should be counted as a disappointment. So instead, I'll go with the other DP, Teenage Adebi, who thankfully they finally got rid of him, and that he's no longer with this team, because you talk about one of the worst designated players signing and one of the greatest busts in terms of DP signing history. Teenage Adebi is gonna join that list. He basically contributed nothing for this Houston Dynamo team. And especially, how I've always said that it is a cardinal sin whenever you try to sign a designated player that is a defender. Yeah, they decided to commit that cardinal sin, and it's not a big surprise how when you commit that cardinal sin of signing a defender or even a goalkeeper as a designated player, if they don't produce at a rate not only above average, but are considered to be one of the best in the league, it's always going to be considered be a bust if you decided to sign a designated player as a defender. Now, in terms of young player to watch, now I'm kind of bend my rules a little bit, where usually with a young player to watch, it's guys that are under 23 years old, and Griffin Dorsey is 24 heading into this season, so you couldn't say that he's kind of a young player anymore. But what I will say about Griffin Dorsey is that this is a kid that really came out of nowhere, had a breakout out season for this Dynamo team, especially in the second half of the season. I mean, there were times this season in the beginning of the year he was a forgotten man for this Houston Dynamo team, and then the League Cup happened where he started to get more minutes, and the rest is history. I mean, he started to be a regular contributor to this Dynamo team, especially down the stretch in the playoffs. And that, yeah, this is a kid that it will be interesting to see whether or not the run of form that he had in the second half of the season, whether he can follow that heading into next season too. But by far, he's probably the guy that you could say is a player to watch. Another guy I would say that could be a player to watch is now Nelson Quinones, but it's kind of the same argument I'll have with Griffin Dorsey, whether or not if he can follow that consistency that he had last year into this year, because that's always been his biggest problem, where he's been very inconsistent, and really this was the season where he finally found that consistent form as well. So what went right for this Houston Dynamo team? Well, a lot of things went right. I mean, they won the US Open Cup. They're back in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. The dynamic attack of Bassi, Herrera, Bear, Carrasquilla, and Artur. So again, this is a team that they don't really have a difference maker on the attack, but they have a numerous list of difference maker that can always step up when needed. And all these guys I've mentioned not only had an incredible season, but have regularly been contributing in terms of this Dynamo attack. And then I think the other thing that maybe is being overlooked in terms of how good the Dynamo has been this season is their defense. Their defense has been dramatically improved this year. Now, a lot of that has to do with Steve Clark really turning back the clock, kind of turning back the clock to his Portland Timbers days, being just an absolute wall in front of goal. But you look at this defense. I mean, get guys like Sevchenko and Mikhail, two guys that they were kind of almost forgotten men, really stepped up near the end of the season, and then everybody will not forget about Franco Escobar joining this team. I think that was one of the best signings the Dynamo has had in really the most recent memory. I mean, getting Franco Escobar and how good he was with LAFC and joining now the Houston Dynamo and providing the spark to that defense that we haven't seen before. Because this team for a long time they were leaking goals left and right, but the fact that they have dramatically improved at the back and don't just leak like so many goals that we've seen in the past, just to show you how good this Houston Dynamo team for this season. And another thing I will also say that went right, even though I didn't write this, is their road form. And while their road record is still not great, it's definitely much better than what we've seen in the past years or so. And I've said this before, even going back to last year, where even though the Houston Dynamo wasn't getting reserved on the road, they look like a team that looked much more competitive on the road than what we've seen before. Because this is a team that, a lot of Dynamo fans have always said that, well, we're on the road, so it's an automatic L every time because they don't show up. They started to finally showed up, even going back to last year, and this year they finally started to get the resort that it's shown that they could be a competitive team, and that when you play against the Houston Dynamo at home, it's no longer a freebie kind of games as what we've seen in the past, and I have a feeling that's kind of going to continue even heading into next season. Now that being said, in terms of things that went wrong for them, I mean not really much that went wrong for this team, other than the fact that we knew that all Cinderella and Dark Horse run has to come to an end, and it did against LAFC, and then of course the problem with the DP rotation, besides Hector Herrera being Hector Herrera and really turning back the clock this season, two of their free DP was just a complete black hole of their roster, and it unfortunately it's kind of nothing to do with this upcoming or nothing to do with preparing last season, because they were already having problems when it comes to that. That was part of the old regime that made some terrible decision of getting the likes of Seba Ferreira that really favored of this team, and eventually got on loan. And then Teenage Adabi cannot stay healthy. Also, as I mentioned, huge liability at the back. So the good news about that is that they already got one of their DP in terms of fixing that black hole in the roster, and they can potentially completely fix it if they decide to sell Seba Ferreira outright. And then lastly, again, they didn't get off to the best start of the season. I actually said they didn't get off to the best season. It's actually the best start of the season. They actually were struggling coming out of the gate, and this is where there's a lot of naysayers that say, "Oh, great, it looks like it's going to be another rough year for the Houston Dynamo." But no, they eventually improved to a point where they made it to the playoffs. So again, this is kind of where I started to be nitpicking a little bit, because there really wasn't a lot that went wrong for this team this season. So moving forward, how is this team going to look heading into next year? So as I mentioned, with those two DP spot, they already decided to move on from Teenage DB, and that Seba Ferrer could be the next one. Oh, actually, I put Herrera there. That's the wrong name right here. Let me fix that. It's actually Ferreira that I'm talking about. So yeah, I think they're eventually going to sell Semper Ferreira outright, and that should open another DP spot. So with two DPs being open, what are some of the spots that they could spend on? Well, one of them could be a DP number 9. So again, this team, despite the fact that we talk about guys can step up in terms of scoring goals, they still do lack that DP number 9. So I think that's going to be one area that they're going to look for, and also they definitely need a replacement in terms of the number 9 spot. In terms of depth too, because they lost Corey Bear to FC Cincinnati. And then the big question, I think this could be a huge question in terms of next season, and this is where the most pessimistic Houston Dynamo fans will point out the fact that, well, as great as last season was was that maybe just an outlier? Will we see these attacking players that really had a great season and in some way kind of punching above their weight? Will we see some regression heading into this season? Because if there is regression, you better believe that this team is not going to be as good as what we saw last year. Considered they really haven't done anything in the transfer for market this offseason as well. And then speaking of the transfer market, they eventually look like they're going to move on from Coco Carrasquilla. He's going to be a hot commodity in terms of teams in Europe looking to get his service. But if they do eventually move on from him, they'll definitely be looking for a replacement, and that's where maybe the other DP spot could be spent. And the other thing is that they definitely need some depth in terms of the midfield and attack. I mean, their midfield is a little bit shallow, and then when you look on their attack, especially the wing play, the wing spot is where they're a little bit short in terms of depth. So that's going to be an area that they might have to address. And unfortunately, so far they haven't really quite addressed that. And we've seen before where because the team likes to be cheap and decided to not be aggressive when it comes to signing players, again, it's going to be interesting how this season is going to be. I think this season is going to really prove to see whether or not if this was an outlier, just like what we saw in 2017 when the Dynamo had a really great season, but it turns out to be an outlier, and then they go back to become basement dweller in the Western Conference. But yeah, let me know in the comments below. What do you think of this Dynamo team? What do you think went right, went wrong, and most importantly, moving forward, how is this team going to look heading into next season? But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys do like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.